So we'll walk through a little bit about Excel, graphing, and trend lines, and some of the data we can have. So first thing we need to put our data in. I've made some fake data here, and I often will put my independent variable first and my dependent variable second. It's just that when you highlight it, that's how Excel is more likely to accept the data, and whenever you're trying to put in scatter plots and whatnot. If you put it the other way, you can change it. It's just you got to go through some additional steps. So often I try to make life simple, independent, and then dependent. So I'm going to highlight my data. I come up to insert, and I have all my chart options here. Now with what I'm doing, because I'm looking at time and task completed, that's a good independent dependent variable relationship. So I'm going to look at a scatter plot, and I often just choose the very first one. It gives me my plots, wants me to put a chart title, which I can add, but the data's there and I can work with it. Now, say I want to change how it looks, there's several different things I can do. First, I can choose the quick layouts, and there are all sorts of options here, some that have the trend lines already built in, like layout 9 is a great one because it not only has the equation, but also has the r squared, and it has all the components. But say I chose just one so that I'd have my titles. If I don't want something like the series 1 on the side, I click on it and I push delete. It goes away. If I want to change my titles, I can double click on them and just change it to, say, new title. And then my axes would match my variables. So this was time, and this was tasks completed. And I want to delete the title part there. All right, so say I want to also, maybe my data is not showing up very well with these numbers. If I click on the numbers, now you see over here, it now says Format Axis. If that didn't show up, I could right click and choose Format Axis. And what it does, it takes me to that fourth icon on that part, which actually allows me to change my axes. I can change the minimum and the maximum of my values. So, and I can change how many units each of those are done. So maybe instead of 5, I want to do 3. Gives the data a little bit more in there. Same thing I can do then if I want to change the x-axis. I would click on it, and you can see that here, by clicking on those numbers, it's saying it's going from 0 to 12, with my major units being 2. Maybe instead I want that to be 1. Different options. Now, say I want to add other parts though, like the trend lines. There's several ways to do it. One way is I can click on the data, and you see how it highlights? Now I'm going to right click on it, and I can add trend line. That's one way. All these ways will give you the same thing. Another way, I can come up to this add chart element, and I can add anything to my graph that I may potentially need, whether that's axes, labels, titles, chart title, data labels, but the one there on here is the trend line. Right now it's at none. I can choose any of these options here or more trend line options. So I'll just click the more trend line options, and that's nice because now if I look over here, I have all my options. So you can see it put the dotted line for the linear equation. Now I want the actual equation, so what I can do, if I just scroll down, I can change this to display equation and display the r squared. The r squared is talking about how much variance within the data can be accounted by what's actually occurring. So here it's a very strong r squared. When you talk about linear equations in regression, you talk about the correlation coefficient. That would be the square root of this value. But for what we're doing, the r squared can give you a general idea of how do these different trend lines compare. Now, say I want to see, is one of the others better? I just clicked on the trend line, and I can change it. Maybe I want to see, how's the exponential? Oh, the r squared went down, so probably not as good, but it does give me an equation. That little e is for the exponential function, so you'd want to look at a little e on your calculator if you want to do it. If I go to logarithmic, ln means the natural log, so that would be, you'd look for that on your calculator. On polynomial, it starts in the squared, but I can change this. Oh, let me click back on my trend line. All right, just go back to the 3 bars, trendline options. I can change the order, which would mean like here's a cubic, a quartic, a fifth, this polynomial to the 6th, and I can try all those to see if one of those is a little bit better. But if they're close, often I'll use just the square because it's the easiest equation. And again, make sure you have the equation showing the r squared. Now say that you get something weird like a solid large capital E, and it says like 0.00 e to the negative 20th. What that would mean is that it's a very, very small number that can't show up currently how this is formatted. So what I would do is I would click on the equation. Now I got a couple options here. I can click on the triple bars and I can see that it takes me to my number categories. Or I could right click on it and do Format Trendline Label. Okay, it's got to be the trendline label. And you see I'm in the same place when I click on it. Now general is the typical option, but what I can do is I can change this to multiple various options. For example, if I do number takes it to a certain number of decimal places. And you can see I just lost my x squared, which would be bad. But maybe I take it to 6 decimal places. Now look how much more accurate that equation just became. Okay, because it's going to the 6 decimal places. And as we get to large numbers, having more decimal places or changing these categories can be very helpful and can be useful. Then what I can do is I can say, okay, maybe I want to answer questions. Maybe I want to know if I work for 20 minutes, how many tasks could I complete? So what I could do is I would just use this equation and put in 20 for my x's and solve it with my calculator, or I could even write the numbers into a cell using the equal sign. Like, see, if I do equals 2 plus 2, just like I would in a calculator, it gives me a solution. So I could always use Excel to do it, or I could use my calculator. If I want to know how long will it take to complete 40 tasks, I would plug a 40 in for y and have to move my equation around and actually solve it. It becomes a little bit more complex, especially as I work with quadratics, because I have to then shift it so that 0 equals and then complete the square or use the quadratic formula, but it can be done. Okay, so you got to look at your equations, think about what you need to solve and how can that be done. So that's some of the basics. If you got more questions, please let me know.